Welcome to Season 3 of Outstanding Women Leaders, Witty and Wise Conversations. I'm your host, Katie L. Leeds, founder and chief owl at Outstanding Women Leaders, Owl Professional Coaching, an organization dedicated to empowering women leaders to rewrite their story and reconnect to fulfillment and joy. Owl is on a mission to host 100 million witty and wise conversations that disrupt the way leaders think and inspire you to live in a different way in relationship to each other. We have 4 rules today for our podcast. Number 1, nobody gets to be wrong. Number 2, nobody gets to be right. Number 3, everybody gets to be vulnerable. And number 4, everything is included. We do not edit here. There are birds chirping outside my window and they're a little aggressive today. It's all included in the podcast. This conversation is exactly what it needs to be in this moment in time, including my accidental blurb I made earlier. We've asked our guests to join us via video to allow us to create authentic connection. Eyes are the window to the soul. You will be seen here. You will be heard. There's space for you. When this conversation comes to a close, I will ask our guests 3 questions. If you've tuned in before, you know what they are. And if you haven't, you don't want to miss them. But enough about Owl. Today, I'm excited to welcome Outstanding Women Leader, Marissa Suzaki. Did I get your last name right?
Senzaki, yes.
Beforehand, that's probably the best I've ever done. Marissa is a seasoned talent acquisition and people operations leader with international experience across Silicon Valley, Canada, Europe, Australia, and Asia. Her expertise in working with early stage startups and hypergrowth companies led her to advocate for a humanistic approach to recruitment. In the short time I've gotten to know Marissa, I can already tell she puts the human in human resources. With 15 years of experience, Marissa has recruited for some of the world's best known technology names, including Google, Facebook, and Slack. As Slack's first HR hire, Marissa was instrumental in growing the company from under 50 employees to a team of well over 850 globally in less than 3 years. Drawing on lessons learned from her experience in Silicon Valley, including working for controversial companies and toxic workplaces, Marissa advises hiring managers and founders on the importance of building people first and values aligned companies. She speaks that believes that fostering inclusive and psychologically safe work environments is critical for employee well-being. And if that wasn't impressive enough, what you really need to know about Marissa is how friggin' cool she is. She's so cool. I met her and demanded to be on the podcast. And in 2016, she appeared in Business Insider's Top 100 Coolest People in Australian Tech list. Her interviews have been featured across print, digital, and radio. In addition to recruitment, she is an angel investor and advisor to startups. Excuse me while I fangirl over here at this owl. Really, I was so excited to read that part of your bio. I'm like, I have more questions. It is such an honor to have you on the podcast today. So Marissa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Katie. I'm really excited to talk to you today. And I know we met kind of casually in San Francisco and had drinks and explored the Ferry Building, but I think I'd love to talk more about just kind of my experiences and, bring any insight that might be helpful to other people.
Yes. And when I think of human resources, I think of humans who are overusing what little resources they have. So I was so excited to hear about your humanistic approach. And I want to share a lot of that with our listeners today. But before we do that, because I'm fangirling, I want to know a little bit about being an angel investor and advisor to startups and what that means.
Yeah, so that's something that's kind of new that's come up for me in the last year or so. Just being in tech, I've had the great experiences of working for different companies and now can kind of use that experience to help new startup founders who want to know, like, how do I grow a successful company? Like, what's important for me as I think about the team that I want to build? And so I've been working with one company that's very new, still kind of early stage in terms of seed funding and doing the research and development part of things. But I've been lucky enough to be able to have the privilege to use some of the finances that I've made while in tech and then reinvest that into other companies to help them get started.
I think that's just so inspiring for our women leaders listening to hear, because it's such a space where we anticipate men that are doing that. And it's so great to hear about women. And being in the startup tech side on the East Coast, there's so many of our listeners that are in that, wanting to launch. And so it's great to have that expertise on today. when startup worlds are not known for work-life balance. They're not known necessarily for having a great mental health in the workplace. Talk to us about what that looks like in startup and how you're helping to foster that.
Yeah, when I started in the tech world, and I think things have started to change and are progressing, but it definitely was, it's not an easy lifestyle. And I think people who maybe want to get into tech or get into startups for the first time, it's kind of something that they really need to understand expectation wise, especially with early stage startups. It's really just kind of all hands on deck. Everyone's putting their heart and their passion into what they're doing to make it successful. And that can mean very long days, 12-hour days, working weekends, kind of always on, especially now when you're just kind of always on your mobile phone and getting alerts and notifications. It's really hard to shut off. And I think in my younger years, in my early 20s, I just wanted to impress everyone. And I thought career was the most important thing. And so I made that pretty much my entire life. And to the detriment of my health at times, made that my main focus was work, work, work. And so I think it's knowing like there is a lot of time that goes into working in startups, and it's kind of up to the individual, unfortunately, to have the boundaries and kind of set the expectations on like, these are my working times, this is what you can expect from me. But I do think that we've come to a point now where companies are aware that they need to create more balance there, and I think are looking more at about how to foster kind of more of a wellness aspect in the workplace.
When I think of everyone I know that worked in tech startups, and I had an opportunity when I first moved here, I was just doing whatever side hustle I could. So I was unpackaging boxes and repackaging them for a company called Fancy. And when I think of that, I think of the badge of honor that we wore for working so hard. And I'd love to know about you more about that shift that you talk about on how you strike that balance of, I want this company to be successful. I know I'm going to work long hours, but there's still a balance there because you've lived that. You've worked for some pretty big companies at their startup phases. How did you also help make sure that you felt that balance?
Yeah, it's interesting you say badge of honor, because now I just have this flashback to this one startup I worked at where, and I think this happened a lot in different companies, where people just kind of kept an eye on each other. And it was like, who's the first one in and who's the first, like the last one to leave the office. And it was kind of this badge of honor of like, I get there before everyone else does. I'm the last one to leave. Therefore, it means I work harder and I'm valued more, which is not necessarily true. People always talk about work smarter and not harder. And that's something that I also had to learn throughout the years is, figuring out, what my contribution to the company is, like, what is my talent? What am I good at? And how can I do that effectively while also kind of honoring myself and my life outside of work? And so, for example, for what I do now is I make sure I take a lunch, because I'm the type of person that if I don't actively take a lunch, now I work from home, but if I was in the office, I wouldn't leave my desk, or I'd get the lunch and I'd sit down and eat it at my desk. And it's really depressing to be in an office where you never see the sun. I worked in one office that was kind of ground level, but it was in this interior courtyard, so we didn't get natural light. And I'd get there at like 7:30 a.m. before the sun would rise, and I'd leave at like 7:30 p.m. and the sun would already be setting, and I would never take a break. So now I block out from 12 to 1. I put it on my calendar. Everyone can see it. So I'm very transparent on, this is my lunchtime and when I walk the dog. So it's lunch/dog break every day from 12 to 1. That full hour is my time. And even if I think I don't need it, because I'm like, oh, I could just push out one more email. No, I make myself get food. I make myself drink water, go outside, get a walk, take the dog out, and just do something to kind of distract myself and reset.
When you think back to the times that you were eating lunch at your desk, because I'm incredibly guilty of that as well, what's the shift for you? What's the benefit for you of really honoring that time?
I think just realizing how much that over time, not taking care of myself really compounds and adds up. And so you think, well, I'm okay. I'm not starving. I'll be okay to skip a lunch today. And then it just becomes this pattern. And over time, realizing how that's affected me with, whether it's like really low vitamin D because I'm never outside in the sun, or, cholesterol's up because I'm eating unhealthy because that's the one way that I'm coping with the stress of the job. It's like, once I started to look more at my actual both physical and mental health, I realized that, I wasn't taking good care of myself. And over time, all of a sudden one day I wake up and I realize like I don't treat myself very well. Why is that?
Yes, learn from the elder millennials, and this breaking the pattern is what I heard there. And it's so important because once you break one pattern, you really can start to prioritize yourself in other ways. And right now I find it interesting. We have this really, like, in the workforce, we're looking at, is it the workplace's responsibility to create this mental health and work-life balance, or is it the employee? I'm curious what your take is on that from an HR perspective, and also from someone who's lived that tough life.
Yeah, I think it's definitely both, but it is on the employer to create a healthy work environment as much as possible. Whether that's through offering competitive benefits and perks, or making sure that you hire people that are good people that are not going to cause a hostile work environment, and making sure that you kind of get rid of some of those problematic people, maybe if they are creating a negative workspace. But it's also on the individual, because nobody is really going to hold your hand and make you do these things. So a company can say, like, we care about our people all they want, but unless you're really standing up for yourself and being your own advocate, it's hard to do that. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. At my current employer, I thought it was really great that the CEO kind of sent out a message to remind us about that and tell us about the different resources that the company provides. So a lot of companies nowadays will offer like corporate subscriptions to apps like Headspace or other things like that. And he mentioned mental health is the same as physical health. It's your health. So take off the time if you need to. I'm actually taking next week off. I realized that I was under a lot of stress. I did what I've done in the past, and I worked really hard and pushed myself, and I saw it affecting my physical health, and had a difficult conversation with my boss about, this is kind of where I'm at. It's affecting my productivity. It's affecting my concentration, and I need this time just to reset. Even with the company saying this is where we stand and what we believe in, that was still a really scary conversation for me to have. And it definitely took me kind of standing up and saying, like, no, I definitely need this time off, because I know how it will help me.
What advice do you have for people on navigating those scary conversations? Because here you are working in HR and you're still feeling that nervousness. How does the average or the low person on the totem pole, so to speak, approach their boss in a way that is really clear and communicate what they need?
Yeah, it's difficult, and I definitely push for, if you can, if you realize like you're dealing with anything like depression or anxiety, to seek professional help of like a therapist or psychiatrist, that can kind of help you navigate through that. But also, hopefully you're in a workplace where you can have open conversations with your manager, and I'd say express those things early on. Don't wait until like, you're in the middle of a burnout or panic attack to where you can't work anymore. Try to lead up to that. I had conversations about, like, I'm not feeling as inspired about work as I used to because of whatever reason, or these are some of the frustrations I'm having, or I let her know, like, hey, this project actually took up way more time than we had anticipated, and I stayed up till 12 a.m. reviewing applications. And, unless I said that, she had no idea. And that's, as a manager, for her to say, like, oh, that's definitely not how I want you to be spending your time, and that's not productive time. And, I'll get you the extra help that you need. So definitely, like, building up to those conversations and in the real time, giving as much feedback as you can.
That's a great point. Early on, expressing that, so that when there is that moment, or if a moment occurs, you've already laid that groundwork. I'm also a big fan. I get asked a lot of scenario questions when people are interviewing me. I have scenario questions for my future employer. What's the scenario, right? What is the FMLA, or what is that? Asking those questions, I think, even before you step foot in the door is important. How do you vet workplaces? You've worked at several places. You have, what's your vetting system? What questions do you recommend people ask? I'm getting ahead of myself, but it ties in so well.
Yeah, it's hard because, people can tell you what you want to hear sometimes. So of course, questions that I always ask, or I hear candidates ask me, is always like, describe the company culture. What are the people like? And of course, everyone is going to say, oh, I love the people I work with. It's so great here, whatever they might say. But I think looking for concrete examples. And so, what I do with recruiting, and when I even think about myself in job searches, it's very much for me a values focus. So I stay away from the word culture because I think that can just be kind of fluffy, can mean anything, and also can be a little bit like exclusive at times. But when I think about values, values are things that are at the core of every person's being. And so we might not have the same values, but those are things that are essential to like how you live your life. And so I like to think about, what are my core values? What are the company's core values, and kind of, do they align, and is there a fit there? So for me, I like to ask concrete examples. Like I'm very much about like emotional intelligence. When I worked at Slack, one of the values was humility. I hear a lot of tech companies now also mirroring that word. But I'll ask for actual examples. So if I'm interviewing at a place, rather than ask, are people nice and are they humble, and is everyone there low ego? Of course, they're going to tell me what I want to hear. So I might say, can you give me an example of a recent time where someone showed humility? What did that look like? Hopefully they have something that pops into their head right away, but they might not. When I worked at Slack as a recruiter, I'd give an example, and I'd tell a story of this time about our CEO, Stuart Butterfield. And a lot of times CEOs in some companies might not be accessible, they might not be friendly, you might not even talk to them. So we had a time where we had the summer picnic. A few of us came back to the office to like watch, I think, a basketball game on the TV. He was there with his girlfriend at the time, and they had ordered some Chinese takeout. And when he saw us come into the office, he felt really bad because he was eating in front of us. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, you guys. I didn't know you'd be here. I would have ordered food. And we're like, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. And we went to another room to watch the game. And then we hear this little knock at the door, and he comes in with a tray, and he had like portioned out the rest of his food. He had bowls, he had soy sauce, utensils, like everything. And he just served us food. And I was like, this is an example of humility, because nobody had to do that. And as the CEO of a company, he definitely didn't have to share his dinner with us. But like, those are the types of stories that as a recruiter, I'll tell candidates. And as a job seeker, like, I hope to hear some sort of example of that also.
What an amazing example. What a great guy. And also, I love that you're turning that same question. Like I mentioned, scenarios. I want to know, what's for me when I ask a company, I want to know, okay, if I've been out sick for a week and then a week later my mom dies, and then probably not again, she's gone. But right, I've asked a specific scenario of where there's a lot of out, and then I request another week because I'm having a hard time. Like, how would you handle that? And I love that you're asking, can you give me an example of a time? Like, these are the questions they're asking us when we're vetting them. So great questions to be asking for future employers. And so many people are looking at the Great Resignation. We'll get a little bit more to career advice towards the end, but I want to talk about bringing this idea of bringing your full self to work. I'm really excited about this. I've been excited about this the whole time. Right now, we have this shift where people are like, I want to bring my whole self to work. I don't want to have to hide myself. For me, I've been a high school teacher, so bringing my full self to work looked a little bit different, right? There was privacy. I've been in forward-facing roles as CEOs myself. Like I've very much felt like full self to work is about authenticity, and not so much about bringing every aspect, facet, and piece of me. Tell me a little bit about where you're at with bring your full self to work.
Yeah, and I'm so glad we've talked about this in the past, because it's one of those things where like people say it now, and I kind of get that yuck feeling. Because yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little overused, and it's definitely a different mentality. I think if you look like back and maybe like, um, previously it was like you have your work life and you try to keep that really separate, and then you have your home life that's separate. Then we kind of turned into this like work-life balance, and how do we like manage the two and blend the two. And then if I think about like, companies like Google that really were at the forefront of having like these amazing benefits and perks where we serve you breakfast in the morning and dinner, and you can see a doctor on campus and get your dry cleaning done and get your car fixed. So there's absolutely no reason why you ever have to be home. Like, you can do everything on this employer campus. And that's, I think, then even meshed and evolved more into this like bring your full self to work, where people are trying to use that as like them saying that they're inclusive and they're welcoming to all types. And I just think that to me, it's becoming this blur where we're kind of lacking boundaries now. And there's this pressure to always be on, like, always be yourself and be happy at work and kind of share everything. And, that might be fine if it's kind of your first job out of college and you still want that kind of university life where like you're hanging out with everyone and you're there all the time. But, I'm turning 40 this year. I want to get along with my colleagues. If I make friends there, that's awesome. But that's not my first priority to like have this be like where I spend my whole day and have all my friends be my coworkers. And so I think when I've talked about psychological safety, like we want to be able to bring certain parts of ourselves to the workplace and feel like we're not going to be judged or ostracized or bullied. But at the same time, it should be up to the individual how much they want to share and bring to work. If I don't want to talk about my private life, let's say I have a husband and children or whatever, I might not want to talk about them at work. I might not want to tell you what I did over the weekend. I think there just needs to be a little bit of boundaries in terms of how much of ourselves and what parts of ourselves we bring to work. But yes, we should be able to bring certain facets without fear of judgment.
I really appreciate that you mentioned creating psychological safety. You have a bachelor degree in psychology, and this concept of time together, what makes you feel psychologically safe about bringing your full self to work may not be the same as what makes me feel safe of bringing that to work. And so I appreciate that you bring that perspective in. And I always have this picture when people say bring your full self to work, they want to be able to drop an F-bomb, like they want to, dress how they want to dress. It's such an interesting fine line. And as we continue to get blurrier and blurrier every year, I don't know if that's old age. I don't know what's happening here. But this bring your full self to work for me has always been an interesting one where I've wrestled with that myself. I'm like, I don't want to have to be two different people. Being a teacher, being a CEO, I really did feel a little bit like two different people depending on the size of the town. When I was in Chicago, it was very different. I'm not running into my students there, right? When you work at Hoboken where it's 1.2 square mile, I am always on. And so for me, I'm like, I don't, this idea of being able to shut off, I really look at authenticity. I want to bring my authentic self. I don't want to have to pretend to be, somebody I'm not, extra nice or whatever. I'm pretty nice, whatever the thing is I'm pretending. But it's an interesting when you think about psychological safety, and some people bringing their full self to work can put other people feeling like they're not psychologically safe. How do you set boundaries for that? How do you allow people to feel safe to bring themselves, but also safe enough to have boundaries?
I think that's where like the values of the company also have to be focused on kind of like core things like we're talking about, like humility and not necessarily having I don't know, like one of those slogans like, here we just get shit done, or having this like almost cult like, oh, everyone here is an overachiever and everyone like you're saying, likes to swear, likes to drink beer on Friday, like just allowing people to have a personality that's kind of outside this identity of the company.
Yeah, Yeah. And you're kind of dancing a little bit too around some red flags. So I'd love to, since we're in there, like what are some red flags that we can look at that are like, all right, this company doesn't actually mean, oh yeah, we want you to be your full self. Because I've been hoodwinked. I thought that I was getting into that situation where who I was fine. And then it was like, well, can you tone you down this way and try this. So what do we look out for when we're interviewing?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of things to look at. Like if they can't speak to the, like as we said, if they can't speak to the values and give examples, if what they're talking about in terms of values are kind of superficial. I remember a long time ago interviewing for some company that like prided themselves on Wednesdays, we wear fake mustaches and drink whiskey or something completely bizarre with, which is like not really important to the interview process or how you vet me. But I think a lot about different environments I worked in that weren't healthy. And one of the things that I don't talk about often, but it's a little known fact, is that I worked for Theranos, and that was probably back in 2012. I can't remember the exact year, but that was the company that's infamous now because the Wall Street Journal reporter broke a story of the CEO, Elizabeth Holmes, basically trying to sell this proprietary machine that was testing blood, like just with a prick of one little drop of blood could test all these different things, and faster time and send all the info wirelessly to whatever device. And people were really saying like, she's, the next Steve Jobs. And I interviewed with them at the time. And there were certain things that I just noticed like in the environment that I didn't pick up on, or I maybe subconsciously did, but just kind of brushed it off. So I think there's so many things even before you get into that interview process with how people communicate and how they handle the interview process itself. For example, I think I interviewed at like 7:00 in the evening at the time, which I thought was cool because I was like, wow, I can have my normal 9 to 5 job, go interview at this other place. They'll never know. In hindsight, I was like, why were we interviewing so late at night? Well, I realized once I got the job there that, I was expected to help coordinate and run these interviews that took place pretty much from, 8 in the morning to like 7 p.m. at night, like 7 days a week. So me and the other people on my team would switch off on who would come in on the weekend. So, I was working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. So that was one little clue that I should have picked up on. And then in the company culture, just getting there, like I had, there was just a security guard who checked me in at the front desk, and I guess he didn't notify the HR lady that I was there. So she came down a few minutes later and sort of berated him in front of me of like, why didn't you let me know? And how long has she been sitting here? And I thought that was unprofessional. And then when I actually started at the company, that HR woman was gone. She was no longer there. So it's just kind of like, this is some weird turnover. I thought I'd be reporting to her, like what's going on? So always just kind of look at, I think, the way that communication is handled, how organized the interview process is, how do people talk to each other. Even when I went there at 7 in the evening, there were a lot of people still at their desks and they just seemed quiet and kind of miserable. So I should have realized that like, this doesn't seem like the kind of relaxing, happy, like environment I would want to be in.
They must have had a really great pitch.
I think at the time I was excited because I actually had the COO reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I was like, wow, like this top executive's messaging me, which I also realized it was just like one of their sourcing strategies. So it wasn't actually him. There were different people that were given his credentials to use his LinkedIn profile and reach out.
How long did it take you to figure that out? Did you know that while you were interviewing, and did you find that out once you were hired that he was doing that?
Oh, I found that once I was hired. Yeah. But, at the time I was young and excited. I was like, wow, these like executives are reaching out to me, and I got to meet like the CEO of this company, and that's really cool.
Predatory recruiting, it exists. It's a thing. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that and some of the red flags that we can look out for when we're interviewing. I actually had overheard someone talking last week about oh, this guy wants to have an interview right now. It was 8 o'clock. I'm
Mhm.
like, ooh, that's a big red flag. I wouldn't want to work at that company. We had just
Yeah.
been chatting across the way because I remembered that story you shared. So I think this is just some really great, red flags, and that feeling that you get. We go on dates. We talk about dating red flags. Companies.
Mhm.
I sometimes I equate like interviewing at jobs as like when I was dating on apps and like really desperate to want to like this person. Like in my head, as I'm sitting on a date with like the butterfly catcher, I'm like, well, does the list really bother me? Like, I encourage people to like really to like listen. And as we get older, we not only do we listen to those red flags, but we feel like we're not desperate anymore to take some of those jobs with those red flags. The last thing I want you to be able to share, because you have so much depth and knowledge in this area, is PTSD from work is real. And I've experienced it. And for anyone that's listening who really resonates with toxic work environments and what that feels like, I know that you've had PTSD triggers from previous work environments. Can you speak to that a little bit for people?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the making sure you speak up for yourself and set your own boundaries, because I've had all these crazy work environments with, really either coworkers who were bullying or bosses who I've actually had therapists say, like, these are narcissistic tendencies. This has happened more than once to me. So I think just identifying that in the past, I always made it about me. Like, it's something I'm doing wrong. If I did this differently, then this person would be nice to me. If I just achieved this other thing, then they would see my worth.
You're pulling out my own thoughts right now.
Yeah. And I realized that's not always true. And when you do everything you can and you really try, sometimes it's not about you. It's about the other person. It's about the environment. And so it's okay to leave a job. It doesn't mean that you failed. It's about standing up for yourself. But it's hard because these are like parts of our shadow then that we carry forward. And so for me, it's a lot of times stopping and questioning myself. Why am I feeling triggered right now? Is it really what's happening in the present, or is it reminding me of something in the past? And I think being able to have a coach or a therapist or someone that you can talk to about that is really helpful. I've been doing a lot of work in the last year learning about attachment theory, which is super interesting, and just kind of that also kind of plays into just learning about being more self-aware and kind of questioning your thoughts and feelings when they arise.
Yeah, self-awareness and emotional intelligence
Yes.
is something that comes along with that. I think as you develop your career, and investing in a coach or therapist are great ways. I know for my triggers at work, I had a coach the first time I hired her, and I was just like, we're supposed to do this onboarding session. I just have to tell you what happened at work today. She's like, maybe it's not about you. And that was a really hard place for me to sit. I'm like, but if it's not about me, I can't fix it. I just took this job. I want to be able to fix it. And therapy or coaching and healing, having someone else to be able to kind of hold your hand for that. I help people rewrite their stories. I think rewriting a story from PTSD at work is actually really hard. And there's quite a bit of healing that takes place, particularly workplace bullying, which I've also been on the receiving end from.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I just watched a YouTube video recently, and I'm not going to remember the name of the person, but this psychologist did research and was saying that the signs of burnout are very much the same as going through PTSD. And so that's just something to think about when you're like, oh, I'm just a little burnt out. It's fine. Like, I think, we need to listen to like the signs that our body is giving us.
Absolutely. I've had 2 major burnouts in my life. One, I worked from 4:30 a.m. until about midnight to 12:30 every single day for a year. You will shoot your adrenals out if you do that.
Yeah.
And when I found, and what is interesting sometimes about the way the universe can work, you talk about having several bosses that were narcissistic, is fast forward and 6 years later, I found myself in almost a very similar situation, not with the hours, but almost with the characters and the same bullies, and then just a different state, different environment. And that's a really great eye opener to work with on a therapist. You talk about attachment issues and like the healing of why am I attracting and why am I creating? And that was a hard one for me to say, oh, it's not about me, but I'm the same person. Sometimes it's just not about you. It's about the toxic place. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm stumbling through I'm a little rusty today, admittedly, but I do remember my 3 questions I always ask at the end. So, and I am excited to hear from you. What is your superpower? You have so many talents. What is your superpower?
I really think my superpower is just being able to make connections with people. When I look at the different friends that I've made throughout the course of my life, like most of them I've had for 10 plus years, and all just like very different people from different walks of life. So I feel like I'm able to relate to and connect to lots of different types of people.
Totally agree. I met you once. I have you on the podcast, and I think we're planning a trip for you to come visit with Kim. That rumor has it.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Superpower, making connections with people. What is your purpose?
I think my purpose is really to be in a space of healing. So going through the different hardships that I've gone through in life, taking that knowledge for the better and helping other people.
And what's next for you?
Wow. It's a good timing for this question because I'm actually contemplating a bit of a career pivot, like maybe not leaving recruiting forever, but definitely taking this knowledge and applying it more to the field of psychology, maybe going back to grad school, I don't know, but in a space where I can help coach others.
I love that. I want to know more about that when you come to visit. I'm thinking about that master's too. We'll exchange notes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. I will have your LinkedIn on here so you guys can click and follow Marissa, reach out to her with any questions. Some of you might be reaching out with resumes if she's hiring. And you can also give us a like on Podbean or Apple Podcasts where you can listen to us, or on YouTube, you can listen and watch us. You can also follow us on Instagram at Outstanding Women Leaders. You can follow us on Facebook. On Twitter, there's a war going on. I don't know if our tweets are going out right now. But you can follow us on the other social until something else is available. Thank you so much, Marissa. I'm going to give you the last word. Any last parting thoughts for our audience?
Well, I love that you talked about authenticity today. And I think just follow the core of your heart and your gut, and don't change who you are for anybody.